Hi there. Welcome to the Seeker Sisters podcast. We're your hosts, Melanie Norris
and Brittany Hogan, and we're so glad you've tuned in to listen as we share conversations that propel women to live purposefully settled in God's love.
So settle in, relax, and let's enjoy this journey of growth and grace together.
Hi, Seeker Sisters. I'm so excited to be joining you again. Me and Mel are back again for another podcast, and I'm really excited today because I get to introduce you all to my pastor, Pastor Zach Walker. He is joining us today. Hey, Pastor Zach.
Hey, Brittany and Mel, thanks so much for having me on. It's an honor, and I'm excited to just be able to hang out with you guys and chat a little bit about a topic that is very important.
We're really excited to have you. And ladies, you all know we are really just passionate about us being able to jump in the Word and have a passionate relationship with Jesus. We don't just want to go to church and check all the boxes and do all the things. We want to sit at his feet, is what we talk about often. And so one of the topics that has been on our hearts for a while is discipleship. I think it's a little bit of a lost art, and I hate to say it even that way because it's something that is vital to our Christian faith, but I don't feel like it's something that we talk about often within the body. And so we felt like it was important for us to do that and to just have someone on the podcast that could really walk us through what discipleship is and exactly what it looks like for us to sit at the feet of Jesus, but also do it in such a way that we can be growing as disciples. And so I'm excited to introduce you to my pastor, Pastor Zach, who is the pastor of discipleship and formation at my church, A2 Church. And so it kind of just fits, right? He's what he's supposed to be talking about.
I guess so.
But not just his title. I will say that I've had a privilege of learning from him for a while now since Nick and I have been at A2. I actually am participating right now in one of his classes that he teaches at A2 called A2U. He started. It's just an opportunity for us to go deeper in the word. And so we are studying through all the Old Testament right now. But this is my second class with A2U, and I am just excited for y'all to learn from Pastor Zach because he's a great teacher. So without further ado, I'm just gonna let him introduce himself a little bit, tell you a little bit about himself, and we're gonna jump in.
Amen. Well, thank you for those kind words. And, like I said, excited to be with you guys. I've been in ministry in the pastoral capacity for coming up on 8 years and have done pretty much everything there is to do within the local church as far as, different positions and responsibilities during my time, and have loved it. And I just thank God for putting me in a place like A2, which is a non-denominational unaffiliated church here in Birmingham off of Highway 280. And I was actually a student at A2. And so it's just a blessing to have been in the same place for a long time and to have just, be able to sort of receive the fruits of that. So I'm married to an unbelievable woman of God, and we've been married for 7 years now. And then we have two awesome kids, a 3.5-year-old son and a 7-month-old daughter. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me, but I'm excited to hop into our conversation today.
And we're excited to hop into it with you. I can't wait to hear the wealth of knowledge that you have to share with us, especially given your background. So thank you again for being with us today.
We'll see how wealthy the knowledge is,
but So as Brittany said, discipleship is one of those topics we hear about all the time, but we don't necessarily dig into outside of maybe hearing it in a sermon in our inner circles. So we know that before Jesus left, he told his disciples to come and follow him, but then he also gave them a command to go and make disciples. So can we kind of just start at the beginning and talk about what discipleship is and why it's important for us?
Sure. Yeah, discipleship is, there's so many definitions out there. Discipleship is essentially how you follow Jesus. That's what it boils down to in its most simplest form. The word that we get for disciples, and therefore discipleship, comes from the Greek word Talmud, which occurs a number of times throughout the New Testament. And recent scholarship has been making or trying to make the argument that perhaps a better way to translate that Greek word instead of disciple is apprentice, which is perhaps a little bit of a better way for us to think about what it means or what it should mean to follow Jesus. It means to apprentice under him. It means to live at his feet and to pay attention to him and to study him, and then to, by the strength that he gives us, model our lives after him. And so, discipleship, one of I think a leading author on the topic right now is a guy named John Mark Comer, who has some good stuff out there on discipleship right now. He defines discipleship as to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what he did, which is very simple and it's very helpful. It has to do with being in God's presence and having some sort of system, for lack of a better word, or some sort of like formulated intentionality for being in God's presence. And then when you are consistently in God's presence, ultimately what happens is you become like him. And then out of our becoming, we then do as he did. And so maybe later in the conversation, we can sort of talk about how that often gets sort of flipped on its head, where a lot of times as Christians, we try to put the do what he did before the be with him and to become like him. Whereas faith that's been handed down to us says, no, you prioritize presence. And when you prioritize presence, everything else kind of takes care of itself. You will become more like him. And when you become more like him, you will act naturally out of your doing, and you will do as he did. And so, and I feel like whenever you talk about discipleship, I mean, very closely is going to be the idea of sanctification. And so just to kind of distinguish those two things, discipleship and sanctification, because they are so very close. But discipleship is sort of the nuts and bolts and the how-tos, so to speak. And the sanctification is the result of that. Sanctification is like the process of having, I guess, sins stripped from us more and more over the course of our lives, and God making us like a more glorified version of ourselves. And so one of my favorite definitions of discipleship, it comes from the title of a book by a pastor named Eugene Peterson. And the title of the book, which I think this may be one of the ways he defines discipleship, is a long obedience in the same direction.
That's good.
And I think that's something like what discipleship is. It's very small steps done consistently over a long period of time, and being intentional about what those small steps are. So it's important because, well, to quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a 20th century martyr, a German pastor, if Christianity without discipleship is Christianity without Christ. That's a quote from him. And so in other words, like it's an essential, it's a non-negotiable for Christians to think about their discipleship and to then be intentional about what that looks like in their life, understanding that it's not us that causes the change to happen. It's God who changes us through our willing and mutual participation with him and what he wants to accomplish in our lives.
That's so good. That's so good.
Really?
And I particularly love that you gave the distinction between discipleship and sanctification, because I think that's something that can get intertwined sometimes and probably lead us to what you talked about initially of checking all the boxes and doing all the things before we allow ourselves to be. And so you mentioned us talking or digging into it. Let's go into it now. Like, let's jump into it. Like, what do you feel discipleship requires of us personally for us to be able to receive what God, wants to give us through discipleship? Like, what is that thing that we need to do individually?
Yeah, I think it really does all start from a heart posture of truly believing and being at rest that it's it's really has way more to do with God than it has to do with us.
Mm.
And I think I just think about my journey, and I think early on in my Christianity, I learned somehow just from going to church and from being around people who I really looked up to. I kind of learned that to be a good Christian and to be a good disciple and to take discipleship seriously meant that you had to wake up early and that you had to be in your word every single day and that you had to kind of check all of these boxes. And there were sort of, some boxes that like be spiritually elite. And it's like, and so, and I like strove for that for an extended period of time. I won't say fruitlessly, because I think that I think God can use even our tainted motives in order to bring about his will and purpose in our life. Like, I don't know if we can do anything purely. But I learned that I think for us to like really grow in the way that God wants us to grow, we have to start with just living out of a place of assurance and peace, and knowing that I could sit in the corner of my room all day long and not do a thing and still be deeply loved by the Father. And that's really hard for us, especially as, suburbanites or urbanites, people who live like in the hustle and, of just modern living. It's very hard for us to wrap our heads around that, but it is much, much more, not so much about what we do in order to make discipleship happen, but much more about what God is doing. Now, with that being said, it does require something of us. And so I don't want to say that it doesn't. I just want to make sure that before I recommend us doing anything, we check our hearts to see from what position are we doing those things. And if we're doing it from a position of like, oh no, I have to show God that I'm serious about this, or I have to show like my pastor that like I'm taking God serious. I think that if we, by God's grace, are able to see that within ourselves, that's actually an opportunity from the Lord for us to offer that up to him. And so, but yeah, of course, like, it's going to require things like humility. Humility is very important when it comes to what it requires of us to be discipled and to participate in discipleship and participation. And that's how I really see it, is that God invites us to participate with him in the work that he wants to do in our lives. And so will we say yes to participating with him? And if we do, he can work with that. And he can work with that in a variety of ways. And it's very dangerous to try to come up with some sort of formulaic okay, do this for discipleship. Now, with that being said, we are the recipients and the beneficiaries of a rich church history. And so I think it's wise to pay attention to the way that Christians have followed Christ throughout church history, and to study them, and to see why they did that, to basically test it against scripture. And when we do that, we discover that there's something called spiritual disciplines. And when you discover the world of spiritual disciplines, so to speak, you're sort of opened up to this whole biblically prescribed and ancient way of following Jesus that involves these active and passive actions that we can implement in our lives as Christians, and know that this is in bounds, so to speak. It's within it's like on the same road that millions of other Christians have traveled down before us. And so when you start talking about spiritual disciplines, I mean, that first of all opens a whole, litany of resources available out there that I would recommend. Especially anything written by Dallas Willard is really good place to start. He's sort of the he's sort of the modern father for bringing spiritual disciplines into the mainstream for Protestant Christianity. And John Mark Comer, as a result, is a disciple of him, and he's sort of carrying on that work. But when we talk about what can we actually do, I mean, you've got the disciplines, and there's a variety of disciplines that are both individual and corporate. So you have disciplines like fasting and Sabbath and reading your Bible and contemplative prayer and silence and meditation. And so, I don't know where we want to go from there in terms of, I know I'm saying a lot right now, but that is how we can participate, is by seeing how other Christians have historically followed Christ. And then within the context of our modern world and our busy lives, do the best that we can to intentionally have those things in the rhythms and in the crooks and crannies of our everyday life.
Yeah, there's so much in there.
Right.
But I kind of want to.
I don't even know where we start.
I kind of want to unpack. My mind is in so many places because you're right. It requires something of us, but I think because of the requirement that Jesus has of us, we often don't realize, I guess, the depth of the calling to be a disciple and what that really means, because it's so countercultural to what we're used to. It's like upside down way of thinking. And it's essentially a call to come and die. Like, you no longer have rights to yourself because you're following and modeling after Jesus. So I guess my question is, like, how can we shift our mindsets to be able to do all those spiritual disciplines so that we can, be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and be able to disciple other people? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, the first thing I would say is, if that whole world is somewhat new, I would say it would be very helpful to do an inventory of what your current faith walk looks like. I mean, do an inventory, take, sit down and sort of look at your days and see how you're spending your days. Because how we spend our days are how we spend our lives. And so, you can learn a lot about what your walk with the Lord looks like by just being very honest. And that's why I said it requires humility, because, if you want to follow the Lord seriously, then, the Bible teaches us that he disciplines those that he loves. And so that means that, we're going to see some things about ourselves that we don't love that are there, and it might be, hey, what's our screen time? And let's just be honest about that.
Right.
And we don't have to be shamed by it.
Right.
We just need to be humble enough to look at the not so pleasant aspects of the reality of the way that we're living our lives, and then just to be able to offer that up to the Lord and say, God, this is where I'm at right now, and trust that he can work with that, because he can. But I would also say we want to take inventory, number one, so we can see what is present that doesn't need to be present or doesn't need to be present as much. But number two, we need to take inventory to encourage ourselves to see that there's probably a lot more things that are producing the results of discipleship in our lives than we actually realize. And I think that discipleship is much more natural and organic than we often give it credit for. And I mean, you think about, like, who are the people that we are most naturally formed by and most naturally have the biggest influence on? And it's the people that we're around the most, simply by just being around them. We're discipling them and being discipled by them. And that's where this whole idea of apprentice comes into play, and you think about even the disciples of Jesus and how much how much time they spent with the Lord without him even having to do a Sermon on the Mount, or without him even having to do anything. there's just little nuggets that we have sprinkled in the New Testament, little nuances of details that the disciples noticed, that Jesus never taught. Like, we don't know. Like, I can't think of a scripture off the top of my head where Jesus says, hey, you need to go and be alone in prayer. But we do have that detail about Jesus's life. And we know that Jesus himself went out to be alone. So what's happening there? The disciples just noticed that he did that because they were around him a lot. And so, in other words, discipleship is a lot more organic than we realize. And so, I would say, which I'm starting to lose track of the original. I would say number one, so I'm a church guy. And I just believe in the local church. And I would say number one, like discipleship, it is not meant to happen. It is not meant to happen outside of the context of the church. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't individual aspects of discipleship, because of course there are. But I think that so much of our discipleship and formation is intended to, and just most naturally does, occur within the local church. And so I would just say, like, whatever the plays are that your local church runs, run that play with your church. So every church has its sort of, form of programming. And if you are a member at that church, then I would just encourage you, like, run that play. And if there's events, go to as many as you can. And if they do groups, try to be in a group. And if they do Sunday school, try to be a part of Sunday school. Within the limitations of your everyday life, run the play of your local church and trust that God is going to use that to form you and to shape you. So that's number one. And number two, I would say, is start where you're at, not where you want to be. So it would be very easy, to sort of, for instance, John Mark Comer has this. He calls it a rule of life, and you can build a rule of life and add all of these disciplines, and you start looking at it, and it's like you're on Amazon. Like, yeah, I want to read my Bible for 30 minutes a day, and I want to fast once a week, and I want to Sabbath every week, and I want to spend more time with my kids, and I want to go on a date night with my wife, and blah blah. And you can add all these things, but it's like, yo, you gotta be realistic.
Right.
That's you're going from 0 to 100, and you're just gonna stay at 0. Like, I think it'd be better to just pick like one thing that you're not doing and add that to your rhythm. And I much prefer that sort of thought. It's like, discipleship is just supposed to happen within every moment of our everyday life. It's not supposed to feel like a chore, or it's not supposed to, be like, just something. It's like, oh, I gotta go and do this, and I gotta, like, if you're listening and if you got kids, I've got 2 young kids, like, I'm sorry, but hey, if I can stay in bed, I'm staying in bed at this season of my life. I'm not getting up earlier than I have to. I get woken up enough in the middle of the night. I'm going to sleep as long as I can, and I'm going to find other ways to get my word in, and I'm going to find other ways to get prayer in. And so start small and give yourself grace. And a great place to add stuff is in transitions. So whenever you're transitioning from, going from the house to dropping the kids off at school, and then your drive back home or your drive to work, that's a transition. Or when you're transitioning from, like being at the gym to showering after your workout before you put on your work clothes, like that's a transition. So wherever we have transitions, I think those are really good places to fit things in, like prayer, like scripture memorization. And if we can do that more and more and more throughout the portion of our day, that's beneficial.
That's so good, Zach, because I feel like I think it pointed back to what you mentioned about active and passive being important. And I think all of that wraps into what you mentioned about the local church, because if we are always focusing on just the side of I've got to do all the things, and we just hear what you said about church membership and active, then you feel like you got to check all the boxes. I got to go to all the things, but also recognizing the other side of the passive side, the silence, the Sabbath. To me, all of what you said earlier folds into that second question that you just answered of what does it look like for us to just sit with Jesus and allow it to be a part of our life? We are a part of a local church body, and so we are active in our local church and allowing that to
Absolutely.
disciple us. We also recognize that going to all the church programs that's not discipleship either.
It's not
Like
realistic.
learning how to sit at the feet of Jesus and hear his voice and bring him within the transitions of our life allows us to be able to experience him and
Yes.
become more like him than just trying to do all the things. And for whatever reason, I think we just have this out of whack some kind of way that we have to do all the things. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that so much. And you and I have a love for Pete Scazzero's work of
Oh, yeah.
emotionally healthy
Yeah.
leader and disciple and church, and whichever you pick one, all the books.
There's so many, right?
There's so many, but he talks about a lot of the principles that you just mentioned of the rule of life and Sabbath and things of that nature. But I appreciate your perspective on that of just starting small, because
Yes.
sometimes in certain seasons of life, that's the best you can do. And I've heard Jackie Hill Perry talk about how the Lord gave her that grace in certain seasons of life where she had, young kids and she was barely sleeping, as you mentioned, and she was doing what she could. And then when they started sleeping through the night, the Lord was like, "Now,
That's
hey,
right.
hey,
I'm still here.
it's time to look. The season's over. It's time to get up."
That's right.
And so being able to transition with the Lord, I think is great. So
Yes.
okay, so the other side of discipleship is not just us receiving, but us being able to disciple others, right? That's the part of the Great Commission. So, like, what do you feel like? I think one thing I hear from people sometimes, I don't have anybody. Like, I want to grow as a disciple, but I don't have anybody to disciple me. Like, what would you tell somebody that's having trouble with that aspect of discipleship?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, I would want to acknowledge that that's a good desire. And just to affirm within someone, like, if that's true about you and you want to, come up under someone else, so to speak. I mean, that's good. That's a good thing. And that's a God-given desire. And sometimes, we get desires and don't think about where they come from. But whenever we can see that a desire is truly from the Lord, that strengthens us and encourages us, and kind of gives us assurance that we're on the right path. And so I would say, number one, I mean, ask the Lord for somebody, and just keep asking him, and just keep asking him in humility and faith. God, I want to be discipled by somebody, but I don't have anybody right now that is, actively discipling me. Could you please put somebody like that in my life? Could you please make that happen? And just make that a daily prayer for as long as it takes. I think back to, I mean, this is sort of related, but not exactly in the form of discipleship, but more just about friendship. And I mean, I remember when Shelby and I, when my wife and I got married, we were in our young 20s, and, I mean, for everyone who's gone through their 20s, like, you get out of college and you realize, like, making friends is hard.
It's hard.
It's hard. And so, to give the cliche pastor joke, like, one of the greatest miracles of Jesus's ministry is that he had 12 friends.
Right.
I mean, just friendship in that season is tough. And so we got married and we're in love, but we kind of looked around and we had a really strong family support, but realized we didn't really have any friends. And so, we just started asking the Lord to give us friends. And we just continued to do that. And it was honestly years where God would give us, like, little friendships, but not anything that I would say, like, was meant to be, like, deep and long-term friendships. But it was years before we moved into the house that we live in now and in the community that we live in now, before we, started to experience that type of friendship that our heart longed for so long. And so if you're wanting someone to disciple you, I would say, number one, just keep asking the Lord and don't grow weary in your prayers, because he hears that. And that's a good desire that he would want to say yes to. And so keep asking him. Number two, look in the church. Start within your local church. Ask your pastor, like, just express that desire. I mean, we just had this recently at A2, where we had a young man approach Pastor Scott, and he just was like, "Hey, I'm just looking for somebody, to pour into me." And I about did a dance when I heard that, because I mean, you would think as pastors, like, that we're hearing that a lot, but to be honest, like, we don't, and that actually kind of grieves me. But I was so excited to see somebody putting themselves out there and wanting to be discipled. So look around in your local church and just look for people who are a little further down the road, and just ask the Lord if he would bless that person becoming someone who could pour into your life, and make it easy to say yes to. Especially a lot of times if it is somebody that you want to pour into you, they've got a lot going on. And so you want it to be as easy to say yes to as possible. So if somebody feels like they're getting tied into, an infinite amount of meetings that are going to take an infinite amount of time, that's really hard to say yes to. But if you approach somebody and just say something like, I really admire your faith, and God's just sort of lit you up in my attention, and I would really just love to learn from you and how you follow Jesus. Would you have an hour to sit down with me and to just share your testimony with me, and just start there? I mean, that's very easy to say yes to as someone who's being asked that. And but you do have to, at some point, you may have to ask somebody. It might not be realistic of us to always assume that someone's going to ask us and so if you think about it from your standpoint, like, how many times is you, and when I say you, I'm using the plural, so myself included, like, how many times have we gone up to someone and said, I would really like to disciple you. Could I sit down and just,
Right.
It's you would think that would be a little bit more of a natural question, but I've kind of always seen it being on the mentee. It's on them to ask the mentor. That's the way I always see it. I don't think that's universal. I don't think that's 100% all the time. But one of the most blessed friendships that I'm enjoying right now in my life came from me just reaching out to someone that I had gone to seminary with. We had not spoken in probably like a year this was like after we graduated and finished, but God just kept putting him on my heart and was giving me a desire for somebody who could just hold me accountable to some things. And he's also a pastor. And so I just reached out to him out of the blue and just said, man, I know this is out of the blue, and feel free to say no to this, but I'm just looking for someone who I can have a covenant friendship with, and that we could just get coffee or lunches with, like maybe once a quarter. Would you be interested in doing that? And he responded back. He was ecstatic. And that was probably like 4 years ago. And
wow.
It's just allowed us to really share life and ministry with each other and to disciple each other in a really beautiful way. So at some point you may just have to ask somebody.
That's really great.
Yeah, I like that. And I think a lot of times we look for it to be something that is formal or structured, and we discount the informal ways that other people disciple us, or we disciple other people. I like that you said too, just start where you are. Because I know for me, there was a season of my life where, and this was during COVID, I had just left my corporate job. I was a stay-at-home mom with 4 children. And I just felt completely alone. But there were people who were coming online who were discipling me in that season of life. Books that I read were discipling me about how to be a mom in that season, how to shift my mindset and still have value in the place where I was at home outside of my corporate setting.
Yes.
So I think a lot of times we discount the informal ways that people disciple us. And that we can disciple other people too.
Right.
So I want people to know it's probably happening, and you just don't realize it because you're looking for it a certain way. But don't let that hinder you. And I think one probably last question that I have, we go through different stages of life. And I think particularly for women, it can be difficult to know how to plug in and disciple other people or get discipled ourselves. So what advice would you give for what discipleship can look like in different seasons of your life?
So I would think the first thing, so in different seasons, I think that's very important to be able to identify that there are different seasons in life. And I've seen a lot of people become discouraged in their faith because, they assume that what discipleship looked like at one point in their life when they were single and didn't have any kids is the way that discipleship is supposed to look like when they're married and they have kids and they have a full-time job and life is just full. And so that you have to be able to just acknowledge that within life, we do have seasons, just like, I mean, just like we have, well, really, I guess we only have 2 seasons in Alabama, but some places have 4 seasons, and I hear that's quite nice. But
Right.
we have different seasons in our lives, and God gives us grace for the season that we're in. But I don't think that we give ourselves grace for the seasons that we're in.
So true.
And so I think that some of it has to do with us just learning to give the same grace to ourselves that God gives to us, depending on the season of life that we're in. Now, we don't want to use the season of our life as an excuse. So we don't want to abuse the grace and then go so far as to say, oh, well, I'll get around to that when things slow down, because that's why I just think we have to have a more like natural and organic approach with how we think about discipleship, and not so much of a formulaic, like formal sort of approach to discipleship, because it is going to look different in every season. And so I think it just requires sort of that self-awareness of being able to say, okay, this is the season I'm in. This is the season that I'm in right now. And then you have to do something that's very, very difficult for us as humans, but we have to be able to acknowledge what our limitations are, and then to be able to live within those limitations, and to learn this about ourselves, that God loves us despite our limitations. Like, we don't have to exceed what we can humanly do in order for the Father to approve us. There is an end of what we can like physically, emotionally handle. And my grandmother, I think about what she would always say. She would say, Zachary, it sounds like you're burning at both ends of the can, or both ends of the stick. It's like, I think that's an old saying, and that just makes me smile to think about my grandmother. But I think that you have to have grace for yourself in the season that you're in. I think you have to have self-awareness for what that season is. And then I think you have to have humility to live within your limitations. And again, it's just kind of following Jesus where you're at and not where you're not at. If that makes sense.
That's so good.
That's good.
And learn and ask the Lord to show you this, but learn to see mundane moments as the most powerful and formative moments within your day. So eating, driving, showering, shopping, working, resting, these are all things that all of us do every single day, no matter what season of life that we're in. And it's these mundane moments when we offer them up to the Lord. If we can learn how to be present with God, and that's something that Brother Lawrence writes about, practicing the presence of God. It's just a familiar friendship with Jesus, no matter what you're doing. It doesn't have to be, this like super spiritual, like the candles burning and the lights are dimmed and you've got elevation playing and the instrumental in the background, and like that's how we imagine following Jesus. But following Jesus is changing diapers, it's being kind to your spouse, it's providing for your family, and it's doing so filled with the Spirit, like living out of the power that the Spirit gives us to do all of these everyday mundane things.
That's so good. And I think to your point too, as we're inviting other people, as the Lord leads us to disciple other people, being able to invite them into those mundane moments. I've heard Crystal Evans Hurts talk about that's how she disciples. When somebody says, hey, will you disciple me? Sure. I'm getting ready to go fold my clothes. Come over to the house.
Absolutely. Yes.
And when I first heard her say that, I was like, that's weird, but that's real though, because otherwise you set people up to believe that the only way that they can receive from people is going to Starbucks and having coffee for an hour. And not everyone, I don't always have time for that. And that's not realistic, but that's not even honest discipleship, because then you get the polished version of me sitting at Starbucks, not the hair all over my head, kids screaming in the background, trying to figure out life side of me. And that's when you really get to see what does it look like in the hard moments of life to actually practice the presence of the Lord.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I love what you said about just the mundane moments, because again, I think if we don't pay attention to that on both sides of how we receive from the Lord through discipleship, as well as how we prepare ourselves to disciple other people, then we'll miss it. We'll
Yes.
miss it. We'll miss it.
Yeah.
Zach, is there anything else that about discipleship that maybe we didn't touch on that you feel like the Lord has on your heart before we go? I feel like you've given us so much already. I'm just excited.
Yes, that's so good.
I think I would just say, I mean, we've talked about a lot, and thank you guys for inviting me to be a part of this. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, I think I would just want to encourage people, like, try to pay attention to if something is conviction or if it's shame, because I've just seen a lot of people responding to discipleship or lack thereof in their lives, from a position of shame, feeling as if they're not doing enough.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think that if we can be able to notice when it is shame that we're experiencing, we'll be able to quickly sort of put that aside, because we know that our Father does not use shame as a tactic for parenting
That's right.
us.
That's right.
He disciplines us, but he does not shame us. So if we can recognize shame, that's coming from another place. And we don't want to, you know, we don't want to welcome that. So the Lord is very kind. And I think that when we can see that and live in that and realize that kindness and that gentle love that the Father has for us, that is what invites us to actively participate with him in the work that he wants to do in our everyday lives.
Mhm. That's great. That's great. Well, Zach, thank you. Thank you so much. This
Thank
was a
y'all.
blessing. This was a huge blessing
Mhm.
to be able to just dive into what discipleship really looks like. Because as we said in the beginning, it's important for
Yeah.
us to learn how to walk with the Lord and to fulfill the Great Commission. It's what he told us to do, is to
Amen.
make disciples. And so we want to do that for ourselves and allow the Lord to do that in us. We also want to practice that. So thank you for showing
Yeah.
us how to do that and giving us some pointers. You gave us a lot of resources too. And ladies, we're going to try to link those in the show notes too, so that you have a chance to reference some of the resources that Pastor Zach gave. Mel, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
One thing that keeps resonating in my mind is I hear this a lot from older women, that they don't have value. But I feel like no matter what your age is, you still have value. And even if you feel like you're old, remember Moses was 80 when God called him. So there are people below you that still need you to disciple them and show them the way, like to what Brittany was saying, in Zach, in the mundane moments of life. They need your encouragement. So don't forget that.
Yes, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, thank y'all for joining us for another episode of the podcast. And we're excited for us to continue to grow and learn and sit at the feet of Jesus together. Y'all have a wonderful day.
Bye.